Grievers had no legends, just what Terex left us. A penchant for misfortune and a love for the warmth of strange stars. What we lacked, Kaleidozans had in glittering droves. Tales as numerous as the scales upon their bodies, and covering much of the same ground Terran myths did. The story springing up from a creation well and trickling down instances in the legendary life of one particular figure. In the heated dusk of the Andromeda's Hadean washes, where the planet sported their lava on the outside crust instead of in, a purple comet streaked into the galaxy and cooled the planet it impacted on. This was Clutch and Sturl, the home of the Kaleidozans, and this comet was the first scale. The comet's cooling mist driving the lava underground and creating a crater that harvested the subdued heating effects to serve as the first nest for the first Kaleidozan. Springing from the scale in an instant as the conditions became just right, Wave Kaleidozan. As the legends went, as the first Kaleidozan, Wave was lonesome. The planet was barren, save for grazing creatures who had no interest in getting to know the new resident, though this didn't stop Wave from getting to know them, for this was the only thing there was to do. It was through this learning about the grazing beasts and the landscape and sky and gooey molten glass shards and the limits of their scales that Wave gained the ability to sustain themselves on knowledge. In this way, Wave Kaleidozan was sort of like the god of wisdom. Not necessarily intelligence, as Wave made many mistakes in their studies and died many times, resurrected only by their desire to learn more, to apply true wisdom by avoiding the mistakes of the past. After a trillion yushes, the legend said, Wave's voracious studies carried them to the yush they would encounter the second Kaleidozan. Flood Jin Kaleidozan, bathing in burbling superheated lava, emerging from the cracking, drying magma shinier than any discovery Wave had made to that date, and arousing strange feelings in the otherwise hyper-studious Khaled. At first, Wave tried to impress Flood by spouting off facts about the planet the Jinkalid hadn't asked for. Indeed, that the Jinkalid already knew, as Flood wasn't truly the second Kaleidozan. Flood had touched down on the planet in much the same manner as Wave, at the same time. When Flood explained this, Wave changed tactics, and began to explain instead the discovery of a new illness, that which Flood inspired in them. It's important to note here that Kaleidozans didn't really have a word for specific love. There is, rather, Juniplia, equally affectionate one. Kaleidozans typically took two mates of equal standing for life. Keeping that balance of love between the three was basically a pillar of Kaleidozan culture. Juniplia had another translation though, a more archaic one that Flood, in myth, relayed to Wave through sculpture, taking inspiration from their own spherical comet-based arrival and molding eggs of clay, sand, stone, and clouds. These, Flood would go on to install in the skies of Clutch and Sturl, the mythical explanation for the moons and nearby planets. After this act, Flood would go on to become the equivalent of a god of art. On one end of the Khaled home, a third Kaleidozan, attracted to the other two by the sudden appearance of the nearest brightest moon, Skirl, made themselves known. Tide Jin Kaleidozan. Tide brought with them something which Flood and Wave had yet to encounter. A spear fashioned from obsidian. A weapon. At first, Flood and Wave were suspicious, but Tide soon introduced them all to their village of Kaleidozans on the other end of the planet. An entire town had formed around a forest of craters, with eggs within intricate nests of woven metal slats, and younglings learning what they could from their Vijin Kaleidozan hatchers. As for the spears, Tide explained, under the shadier skies that predated the moon, there had been whisperings of a shift in the world. Something big was coming, and, in preparation for any danger that would come to threaten their small but thriving village, Tide had honed a spear from volcanic glass, had eaten of the glass, and gained the deep sight the rocks and oceans only knew. Had asked of their friends to eat it, and see as well. To connect. Flood and Wave were skeptical at first of the village, of the presence of so many Kaleidozans in one place, but the town soon became home, and the pride of sustaining the happiness, ecosystem, and justice in the village soon taught the two that art and wisdom were valuable, no, vital, additions to any community. And they soon came to feel great and warm juniplia for the Jinn Kaleidozin as well. At once, another way to express this affection became very clear to the pair. So the three, Wave, Flood, and Tide, cast off their pleated grass gowns and exchanged grickle skin. Wave's swollen, branching mustache of nerves ushering Flood and Tide's genetic material into their Ural maw, an organ specific to the pleasure and reproduction processes of Vicaleidozins, secreting their own in rapturous excess. Ironically, it was from this union that the dangerous entity Tide had sensed on the horizon emerged from, though not immediately. Eagre, the latent star of the Kaleidozin Codex of sacred myths, came about in the only way they knew how, inconvenient. 2 glittering eggs were produced by Wave, intended by a Vijin Kaleidozin who, per fledgling tradition, cared for the nest in the same way they cared for the others. The hatchlings that yawned out of the eggs showed exemplary traits from the wash of their first breaths. One, Wave Rill Jinn Kaleidozin, had gills, a trait no other Kaleidozin, at the time, shared, rendering them capable of traveling to Skirlus and beyond the moon as later Kaleidozins would, protecting the planet, then the galaxy, just as Tide protected the community. Wave Runnel Vicaleidozin, the twin egg, emerged with 6 eyes. This allowed for extra sight, ultra sight, the ability to venture into the night and see clearly, examine one's environment, come to know things about the planet and world those lacking 6th sight would believe inconceivable for generations before the trait became a staple. Both twins, too, were born with a connection to the burgeoning neural network, obsidian in their veins, and the entire Kaleidozin culture in their brains. Both, too, were noble, serious, and always good-minded. 3 things that did not describe a third sibling, who surprised Wave on hatching wash by struggling out of their body, breathing, with gills, 6 eyes, and a fanged mouth oozing corrosive green fluid unknown to Kaleidozin kind until then. Eagre Vijin Kaleidozin was born shellless, a phenomenon that occurred once in every 1,000 Khalid conceptions, and was considered an omen of bad luck. Kaleidozin culture was built around service, education, pursuit, and defense. Hatchlings toddled for only the wash they emerged, only spoke gibberish for scepters, were only helpless for aurons. Tiny, soft, pale flaps hardening to vibrant scales as durable as any steel. Eagre did something Kaleidozins were not used to. Cried. They were needy, demanding of the attention and affection of their layer, their Simar, something considered more than taboo in Kaleidozin culture. Worse, Eagre wasn't obedient, wasn't studious in any art except combat, a necessary and serious thing to Khalids that the Vijin Kaleidozin used to settle petty disputes with schoolmates in their instruction washes, and barmates in their early adult yushes. All while Rill, allegedly, strode atop liquefied lava to unite distant Kaleidozin communities, sailing with them in ever-advancing skyships to distant lands to meet other kinds, making peace and uniting the galaxy. Meanwhile, on Clutchensterl, Runnel defended the Kaleidozins from an invading force of Prodoctals, an ancient ancestor of Octalavians, leading a proud and peaceful diplomatic mission to their foes crouched and waiting in an attempt to defuse a spat of prejudiced attacks at the edge of the galaxy. An agreement would soon be reached, the Prodoctals pleased, and Runnel praised as a skilled negotiator. In the yushes to come, though, Eagre only proved to be a troublemaker. Worse, they had a knack for it, creating the first calendar purely to sow panic into the usual timekeeping carefully kept by Kaleidozins for centuries. wearing discarded shed scales to disguise themselves as prominent council kaleidosons in post-meeting briefings. The yesh of their 25th hatching prass, though, Eagre's pranks extended a bit too far for even the high standing of their Simar to protect them. Something the young Kaleidozin had leaned on again and again, and that Kaleidozin culture would hold in taboo long after. Rill the Daring and Runnel the Wise attracted potential mates far and wide, and drew favorable comparisons to one another. But Eagre was considered mischievous, burdensome on their Simar, and someone to avoid for the simmering mating season. At first, Eagre considered this a minor setback. Their reputation was marred, yes, but there was still in-person courtship. And everyone, most of all those who loathed the Vigine Kaleidozin, considered Eagre brilliant of scales and mind. Quickly, Eagre gained the attention of a rebellious Vi Kaleidozin, Brook, and a reserved Jinn Kaleidozin, Stream. The three mated and made a nest and developed a deep, warm juniplia for each other. But one wash, Eagre came home to find their nestmates gone. For 5 washes, Eagre waited. Neither Brook nor Stream returned. It was then Eagre knew a powerful leader in the community had blacklisted them, abducted, somehow disappeared, their mates, violated their privacy and autonomy, 2 things Grievers and Kaleidozins held dear. In a fit of despair, Eagre lashed out psychically, their 6 eyes growing to 8, all glowing fiery orange as the Khaled's consciousness shout through the neural network to crash through the mind of Council Member Wave, the utmost authority figure on Clutchensterl, and Eagre's own Sinmar. The violation was thorough enough for Wave to be traumatized for life, and for Eagre to confirm that the Council Khaled had stood aside as the execution of their unruly lovers was ordered. The accusation muddling the situation enough that, while Eagre wouldn't escape consequences, they would be given a chance to live on. Rill and Runnel oversaw the banishment, Runnel lending the Kaleidozin an obsidian bow with a full quiver of magma-forged arrows, and Rill lending the Kaleidozin a cosmopod. At this point, the stories diverged. In some, Rill said what was next. In some, it was Runnel, or Flood. Some say it wasn't said at all, but some well-wisher gave the trickster one more piece of advice before setting off into that wide, wild nowhere. Skjulin Zixar Clutchenwohl Ofta. Our scales are the stardust, so you are only going home.